Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in. It's great to be with you on this Friday. So, we are continuing in our Freeform Friday series, an overview of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I would encourage you, if you haven't read it or it's been a while, dig it back up. I'm just giving a quick, 30,000 foot view of his key principles and those 7 habits, but it's well worth digging in and thinking through, taking time to kind of meditate on it and figure out how to implement these things. At least for me, years ago when I read it, there were some points of application that most definitely made me more effective. Sana says, catching us live here has been scarce, so she's so busy, so today is for her. Very good. Aaron says, I discovered the other day that I have a copy of the book. Alas, I'm much better at starting than finishing books. Yeah, that's fairly common, I would say. I saw somebody one time talked about writing a book for people like that who, has 100 pages, and the first 2 pages have some content, the rest are all blank. So you can convince yourself that you read a book at least. So we're on the third habit, which is put the first things first. But let's frame this within the context of the first 2, and we're going to start with the second one, which in some ways, in my view, is the most important, or it's the first priority, and that is beginning with the end in mind. Remember, we talked about that, and the opening illustration he gives is, imagine you are at your funeral. What do you want people to talk about? And I can't help but think of Charlie Kirk right now, as he was tragically murdered last week. And he said what he wanted to be known for is his faith. And that is clearly what he's known for. I would imagine if you ask him, what's below that, if devotion to Christ is his highest priority, and he seems to have achieved that, and that's his reputation, I would assume family probably comes next. And he loved the U.S., and he loved freedom of speech, and he loved debate and trying to challenge people in their presuppositions and point them to the truth. So I'm assuming, because he spent so much time, creating turning points and so on, that those would have been among his top priorities. If so, he certainly accomplished those things. So if that was his end in mind, we know one of them because he told us. Then he accomplished it. By the way, a side note, personal note, I think I mentioned my son has a song called Hold Fast that I can't remember how much I told you about this. Anyway, it is about to be released, I think. We finished it last weekend. And there is something specific that my son Gabe wants to do with it before we release it to the public. But there should be a lyric video available to you fairly soon, and then on all your media players soon after that. And it's a really touching song. It has as I was mixing and mastering it over the weekend, it got me. And we've been playing this song, listening to the song for several years now, and to have it finished. Anyway, so that's coming up, so be on the lookout for that. I'll put it on X and probably some of the other social media platforms. Anyway, so Kirk is a good example of this. Beginning with the end in mind, visualizing what you want. So the funeral idea is, the end of all things for you on this earth, but to think about other things in your family, in your job, other projects, other things that matter to you, beginning with the end in mind. Remember, he talked about creating it twice. It's first created in your vision, your plans, and the ideas in your head, and then it's created in actually getting after accomplishing the goal. I think that's crucial, and it takes time. It takes time. So whatever those things are that matter to you that you really want to do, you need to stop and have a vision, like an actual picture, a moving picture even, in your mind of what success would look like. To come back to the music example, if we decided that Gabe's next album was a high priority, then beginning with the end in mind would look like something along the lines of, for me, being able to share with you all, it's done. Here's the link. You can go listen to the whole album. Or gathering our friends and family around and having a listening party. Something along those lines where you're envisioning, at least I like to envision, a celebratory element to it of, we did it, we're done, we have the album here. I can send you to Spotify or Apple Music, and here's the 12 songs that we've been working on. That's the vision, and then working toward getting there. The first habit he listed, which I think is, in terms of priority, I would probably put second, is being proactive. And remember how he defined that. You have your circle of concern, all the things that you are interested in and care about. But then you have the more important circle called the circle of influence. And the point was, be proactive in pursuing the things in the circle of influence. It doesn't matter how concerned you are. If you have no ability to do anything about it, why are you spending thoughts and emotions and any other time on the things that you can't do anything about? Spend your time on the things that you can influence. Remember, we talked about that. So that leads to the third one, which is put the first things first. And I found this very helpful at the busiest time of my life. And I'll just share some of what was going on. This was back in the, starting around the year, 2006, really, until I resigned from the pastorate in 2021. So lots of years there. And just to give you a quick overview of some of the things that I had responsibility over. Well, one, in my church, I was the senior pastor of a large and growing church. When I assumed that role, that position, the church owned a strip mall, and we used some of the sections for our church, and then others we leased out to others that helped pay the mortgage and such. But we had a passion, a vision for church planting, and to have a building where we didn't have to have more than one service. The area we occupied was a smaller area. So I won't go into all the details, but we bought a plot of land, and then we had to design a building and then build the building and sell the strip mall. And if you've ever been part of a building project as a church, it's a big task. And this was a big building that we built. And I've heard the statistic. I don't know if it's true. If some of you do, please fact check me on this. But I have heard that the average stay of a pastor after a building project is 2 years. Pastors get kind of burnt out, I guess, and worn out because there's so much work to be done. And the senior pastor usually is, significantly involved in all of it. And they just get so burnt out that after a couple of years, they decide there's a greener pasture somewhere. So again, I don't know if that's true, but that's a stat that some people told me about when we were going through this. So building project, then we got into the building, and now we have this large building that we have to pay for. And we wanted to grow to a big enough size of members that we could then plant churches. The idea was whenever we got to a point where we were realizing we really need to go to 2 services because it's just too full, at that point, instead of going to a second service, we would plant a church. And we did that. Well, that involves raising up pastors, and my vision was to always send out 2 pastors and not have just one man as the senior pastor. So we had to raise up our leaders and elders and that kind of thing, and ministry leaders, and all the things that go on with the traditional model church. So just even if you haven't been in that role, surely you can imagine the pull on my time as the senior pastor of a large and growing church that has built a building and is now planting churches out of it and overseeing all the ministries of the church and so on. Right? That's a lot of time. At the same time, I had started Cross to Crown Ministries, and I was writing my books and publishing those books. And along with that, started the New Covenant School of Theology, where we met Monday and Tuesday nights for 3 hours each. And I taught half the courses. Of course, I had sermons every Sunday and had elder meetings and some other ministries that I was teaching in and so on. So Cross to Crown Ministries, writing books, teaching in our School of Theology, all of that takes a considerable amount of time, as you may imagine. And I had a wife and 3 young children, and I refused to abandon my bride for Jesus' bride and my family for the church family. I was committed to not letting my kids be the proverbial pastor's kids, and I devoted. I just refused not to devote the amount of time and attention I needed to my family. That sounds like a lot. As I sit here and reflect on it, that's a lot. And using the principles here in Covey's book, I believe, was a significant part of how I was able to really accomplish a great deal through all of that and be effective in each of those areas and not get burnt out, not get frustrated and worn out, and not neglect any of the things that I needed to be doing. There's an illustration or a sort of a saying that I've heard from Christian leaders that goes something like this. In order of priority, you have God, family, church, work, everything else. Have you heard that? God, then family, then church, then work, and then everything else. Something along those lines. I don't think that's the right way to look at it. It's all God. You know what I mean by that? I'm accountable to the Lord Jesus for every responsibility in my life. If I choose a hierarchy like that, how do I decide if God is first, and what does that mean? Does that mean my quiet times and devotional lessons? Does that mean prayer and the spiritual disciplines? What does that mean? I don't know how to define that. The scripture doesn't say this is the part that's devoted to God and this is how you devote yourself to God. Based on all the things we've been looking at in the New Testament, godliness and unity and love, seeking first the kingdom. We need to define that. That's the priority that we're given. Well, isn't prioritizing the kingdom, doesn't that include all the other things that come under the hierarchy? So I've never liked that hierarchy. But whatever you define, if you use it as God, then next is family. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I do family worship every evening? You realize the scripture nowhere says do family worship every evening. What's the criteria? How do I decide, what family is? And then church, is that programs? Is that ministries? What is that? And then work and so on. So the way I've always looked at it is everything in my life fits under the God section. Again, I am devoted to Jesus Christ as my King, and I need to do all the things that he gives me to do. So I didn't look at it that way. Now, that's not to say there's no benefit in thinking through some of those roles and responsibilities of life. I am a husband. I am a dad. I am a pastor. I am a theology teacher at the time. All those things that I was doing, and that does help you kind of plan out what you're going to do in those areas. But I just don't like that hierarchy. So this habit, this first things first, helped me, and the 4 quadrants just gave me a visual that was very, very helpful. So let me put this up here. I recognize it's lots of words and maybe too small. And for those of you listening via podcast, I'll try to describe it effectively for you. If you can't see this, I'm sure you can find it online somewhere and blow it up bigger and so on. Aaron says, but the Puritan said nightly flame of the worship is required. Yes. So this is a typical table that has 2 columns and 2 rows, and the 2 columns left to right are urgent and not urgent. Urgent things require immediate attention, and not urgent things are things that have no immediate pressure. Okay, so you got urgent and non-urgent. And then the 2 rows are important, and he defines important by it aligns with your mission and values, and then not important. Okay, so urgent, non-urgent, important, not important. So the first quadrant, the upper left, this would be the important and urgent. As he says there, quadrant 1, these are crises and pressing problems. And you have to deal with most of these. A medical emergency. Right? If you start feeling chest pains, you can't put that off and say, I have more important priorities. If you have medical emergency, you gotta get her done, right? You got to go to the hospital, go to the doctor, whatever you got to do to figure out that's urgent and it's important. Because if you're not healthy, then you're not going to be able to get anything else done. Deadline-driven projects. If there is a deadline and there are significant consequences to not meeting those deadlines, then you need to give some attention to that. And then critical family issues. Those are just some examples. There's a real crisis in the family that needs to be dealt with. Well, then you've got to deal with those. And he says your focus here is you manage these to survive, but over-reliance leads to stress and burnout. If you live in quadrant 1, you feel the pressure like all these things are important and they have to be done right now. That is not a comfortable place to be. I mean, if you know how the body chemistry works, you think of cortisol and adrenaline and all the things, the chemicals flowing through your body when there's something critical and urgent and important. You just can't live there. At least I can't. And it's not the way to be the most effective. Now, so part of your goal is as much as possible to not have to live in that quadrant. Part of doing that maybe is to make sure that you have defined the important things correctly. For some people, everything in their circle of concern is urgent and important. And they just live their lives feeling like I have to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And don't take the time to step back and say, wait a minute, is that really important? Which leads to the quadrant 3. Now I'm going to skip 2. 2 is the most important one, so we're going to save that for last. Quadrant 1, upper left, is urgent and important. Quadrant 3 is urgent but unimportant. And here are the examples he lists there. Some calls and emails. Now, one of the most effective things I've ever done is shut down email. I open email when it's time to review and respond to email. And I use, if you've ever read, what's his name? Do More Better. Anybody know who that is? He was a popular Christian blogger. 10 years, 15 years ago. Somebody tell me what his name is. I can't remember. Anyway, he's got a great little book. I don't recommend everything. I think it's a little too, gets into the minutia of some things. But this I adopted. I open email when it's time to look at email. This is why if you email me, I may not get back to you for several hours, sometimes not for a day or two, because I just don't let email run my life. And then there's a method. Maybe I'll come back and walk through the method of how I handle emails, but I have a couple of email boxes. And basically, whenever I open email, I either reply to it immediately, because it's something I can just, get to right now off the top of my head. I trash it, I delete it, or I put it in a reply box so that when I open email, go through all of them, then I close the email when I'm done and my inbox is empty. So when I close my email, I never have anything in my inbox. So I've already decided what I'm going to do with each email. Again, we can talk more about that down the road. Yeah, Tim Challies. Thank you, Sana. It's a very helpful book for this. So I don't have quadrant 3 emails. Phone calls. Do not disturb is one of my favorite things. I have a handful of people like my family that they can get through. And I have a couple different settings on my iPhone that are great to prioritize. There are some times that I do not disturb. You have to call twice if you're going to get through, that kind of thing. If you're the kind of person that allows every email and every text and every phone call to come through, it's going to get in the way of you being effective, I think. So this urgent but not important, some emails and calls, unnecessary meetings. I despise meetings. Even when I was doing all the things I described earlier, we didn't have meetings that were just because you're supposed to have meetings or it's tradition to have meetings or somebody said, hey, we should have a meeting. No, the meetings were well defined and they were for the most part quick. If I was running them, now I didn't run all of them, but if I was running it, you could be sure it was going to be effective, purposeful, and usually brief unless there was a good reason to do that. Any popular but irrelevant activities fit in this quadrant 3 of urgent but not important. And you really need to get a lot of these out of your schedule, I think. Quadrant 4 is bottom right. This is not important and not urgent. Let me say that again. Quadrant 4, not urgent, so it doesn't need to be done right now, and it's not important, meaning it doesn't help you achieve the end in mind that you began with. This is lots of social media, TV and movies, busy work with no value. We fool ourselves sometimes into think we're being productive because we're busy. I have known lots of people who are busy all day long and they have nothing to show for it. But they think they're being effective because they can look back at their day and say, look at all the things that I gave attention to. So don't spend time in quadrant 4. At my busiest, I allocated a little bit of time to, at the time it was the internet, we didn't have so much social media. At least it wasn't predominant and I didn't spend much time on it. Facebook was kind of the first big one, right? I wasn't very much of a Facebook guy. But internet, stuff that was just sort of for fun. I would allot myself, like over lunch. Isn't it crazy? We had the lunch hour. For me, a lunch was about 10 to 15 minutes. And I would allow myself during that time to scroll on the internet a little bit. And that was it. And then we would set times for movies as a family or my wife and I or something. We didn't have a TV down in the main area, so we just didn't have the TV on, didn't watch TV unless we were intentional and decided we were going to do that. The exception would be Sunday afternoons. After all the Sunday morning activities, oftentimes I would come home and turn on football or something and take a nap, usually during that time. But just If you look back, do you use for those of you with iPhones, do you use the what's it called? It pops up every Sunday and basically shows you how much time you've spent on what over the last week. I find that very effective because it can be pretty convicting. All right, quadrant 2 is where it's at. Aaron says, being an employee again has made quadrant 3 a problem for me. Yeah, and I haven't been an employee for 30 years in the sense that you're describing. So I don't, as much as if you can figure out a way to stay out of quadrant 3, surely there's a way to at least change some of that. Again, I don't know your situation, but yeah, that's the worst. All right, quadrant 2 is where it's at. This is not urgent, but important. You want to spend as much time as you can in quadrant 2. Exercise. We talk about this all the time. Building strength, getting out and going for a walk, that kind of thing. That's important. This is a long-term view here. Your body is the only vehicle you have to interact with the world. And you're going to have more of those quadrant 1 medical emergencies down the road if you don't make time to build muscle, get some cardio, and I would add to this nutrition. Taking the time to meal plan and prepare meals that are healthy. And if you haven't researched what the true data says about health food, if you go with the government's food pyramid stuff, you're not eating healthy. Anyway, that is quadrant 2. It's not urgent, but it's important to keep your body functioning long time the best you can. So that plays in. Relationship building takes time. It's not urgent usually, but it's important. Long-term planning, skill development, recreation, all those things. So here's what I did all those years that I was at my busiest. Monday was my day off. Monday mornings, I would go to a coffee shop and I would plan my week. Now, you may say that sounds like work. Well, maybe it does, and maybe it is, but I can't tell you how effective it was. And I planned my week this way. Instead of having a time management schedule like the planners that start at 7 o'clock a.m. and you have 30-minute slots all the way through, those never worked for me. I put out blocks of time. So I had a early morning block, and then a breakfast block, and then the time frame around 8 till lunch. So a 2.5-3 hour block there. That was a morning block, and then an hour lunch block, because a lot of times I would go meet with people and have lunch, and then the afternoon block, and then the dinner block, and then the evening block kind of thing. And some of those were bigger, right? 3-hour chunks maybe. Some of them were an hour. And I would sit on Monday morning in the coffee shop and I would plan my entire week, Tuesday through Monday. And assign, so I had a list of the areas, so beginning with the end in mind and my circle of influence. These are the areas that I want to spend quadrant 2 time in. Now, if there were meetings I had to have, also I would plan those out. But whether it was planning for something or going to the gym or whatever, I put them in. So my whole week is scheduled. I've got these big chunks of time with the most important things planned and for those big blocks. And I would usually leave 1 or 2. Well, that's not true. I was going to say I left them blank, but I really didn't. What that did, so when the emergencies arose, right? So if I have something planned for the afternoon block today, and there's a crisis, an emergency that I have to deal with, someone in the church. Remember, I'm a traditional model pastor at this time, large church. Someone dies. There's a urgent medical need, or a marriage is in crisis, and they're like, "Can we come talk to you now?" Or my son is whatever. I need your counsel on this or whatever. Some major thing. All right. So I have something planned for this afternoon block, but a crisis has come. I have a decision to make. Is this, or just somebody asks, hey, could I come talk to you for a little bit this afternoon? I'll pull up my calendar, which has all these blocks, and say, okay, you're asking for my attention this afternoon, or this crisis has arisen. And I look at what's on my block. Which is the higher priority? Now, if it's a true crisis, then that's the higher priority. So now I say, okay, yes, I'll meet with you this afternoon. Now, whatever I had planned for this afternoon goes on a list for Monday's planning time. And now I see if I want to reallocate it in the upcoming week. What this allowed me to do is, so something's got to give, right? It's a zero sum, something's got to give. So it would allow me to move it around maybe and kick something out of a lower priority out. What it also allowed me to do is you say, hey, can we talk? And I say, what do you want to talk about? And it's not really very important. Then I say, no, I'm busy this afternoon, but I'll get back to you next week with some possible times. So then I put that on a list. And on Monday, when I'm planning my week, I say, okay, Joe wants to get together and talk about this. I'll see if I can schedule a lunch or a phone call when I'm driving in the car. I love to do phone calls when I was driving in the car because that's, 15 minutes or so that I can use that time. The point is, by having a schedule planned out like that, based on my priorities, quadrant 2 things, so that I'm using that time for the long-term big picture goals. When someone asks for my time, if it wasn't more important, I could say, nope, I'm busy, but I'll get back to you with a time that works. Or if it really did need to happen now, then I can move those boxes around, find something of a lower priority, and just replace that. Does that make sense? You're tracking with me? And I'll just tell you, as a husband and father, that planning time every Monday, I would plan a date night during our homeschooling years with almost without a fail. My wife and I had a date every Monday night. I took care of getting the babysitting, and I planned the evening. And she knew she would have an entire evening. It was just me and her. She didn't have to give any thought. I would tell her what time to be ready and what attire, if it's going to be outside and need a jacket and don't wear a dress, wear jeans or whatever. I would tell her to be ready, and then we would go. And she knew she had several hours of my undivided attention. We were going to do something together, and she didn't have to worry about planning and getting the kids and all that because she was full on in homeschooling mom for all those years. And then planned time with my kids. For many years, I took my daughters out, one each week for a daddy time. And then as my son grew up, we had daddy time regularly. So I would plan those things in. So you can imagine I start putting those in. And then when you said, hey, can you do this and that and the other thing? It's like, sorry, no, I'm busy. They don't need to know what I'm busy with. But my time with my wife is a priority Monday night. And so no, I can't make time for you. And on Saturday morning, I have a date with my daughter. So no, I'm not available for you. I didn't say it that way, but the point is, if you come at me with a quadrant 3 or 4 thing, nope, sorry, I'm not available, but I'll get back to you and see if we can find a time. Quadrant 1 things, we just have to deal with that because it's urgent and it's important. For many, many years, Monday morning was the most important time of my entire week as far as being effective, because I told the rest of my week's time what I was going to be doing to accomplish these things. So I'd block off times to study for the sermon, study for my teaching that was coming up next week, and all the things I just mentioned. And I got a lot done, and I wasn't stressed. And as soon as my wife saw how effective this was, she, would send me out the door on Monday morning because she knew if I spent that time, because you think, okay, it's my day off, taking away from everyone for 2 hours just seems, wait a minute, you're home. Why don't you stay and watch the kids so that I can do something? Well, I did that. Usually Monday afternoons was her time, or Saturday. And I would block off a big chunk of Saturday and say, you go do whatever you want. I got the kids. But the reason that always happened is because I planned it according to the quadrant 2 priorities, and I took a 2-hour chunk. It takes time. That's when I would research For date night, what's going on in our community? What would be a fun thing to do? Is there a show, a concert? Is there some outdoor activity, that kind of thing? And if not, then all right, let's just do something else. Go play putt-putt or go for a hike or go walk the mall or whatever. But I would plan it in that 2-hour chunk, and then I didn't have to worry about it. I knew it was coming, and it gave me time if there's any advanced planning that needed to happen before date night. Like if she needed to prepare in some way, then it gave me time to let her know. And that was true of everything that I did. Like I can look ahead now, and I'd look a month ahead, sometimes even further than that, and say, what's coming down the pike that I can prepare for now? It's important and it's not urgent. So we have a congregational meeting coming up in a month. What can I do to block out a few hours this week to prepare for that congregational meeting so that I don't get to that week and I'm frazzled and just, it becomes a quadrant one, urgent and important because I haven't spent any time on it. So I don't know if that's helpful. That sounds like a lot. I know every time I've gone through this with people, I used to include this actually in one of my seminary courses. For a lot of people, it just seemed overwhelming. But the handful of people that I know who have implemented something similar have been very effective and relatively stress-free in their life. So for what it's worth, that's how I approached this quadrant and this first things first. And it allowed me to produce significantly and stay very effective in those years. So hope that's helpful. I urge you to try it. All right, we will wrap it up there and come back Monday with the next section, Matthew chapter 9. So look forward to that. See you then. Have a great weekend. Grace and peace to you.